All right, welcome into episode 2 of Hail to the Podcast. This is Brandon Justice coming to you along with Josh Henschke, as always, as we do every week on Hail to the Podcast. This two-man crew comes from Maize and Blue Review on the Rivals Network, and this is one of our many podcasts that we bring to you each week. You heard us on Monday on Rise to the Victors with the Roundtable and got together and discussed Colorado State. This episode will be all about Hawaii. We'll quickly go over Colorado State, talk a bit about Hawaii, and then, as always, like we do every week, provide a bit of an insider perspective on what to expect from Michigan football in their upcoming game. The closer we inch towards Big Ten play and the thicker we get into Big Ten play, the more substantial that side of this show becomes. But as far as Hawaii goes, nobody cares about Hawaii. Like, we could probably not even talk about Hawaii. I think everybody would be all right with that, but we still will. We will still recap them a bit and preview it. We'll still talk a bit about Colorado State, but the main topic of discussion is, of course, J.J. McCarthy and his first start as a Wolverine on Saturday. So, Josh, state of the program. Where do you think things are here as we venture into Saturday with Hawaii?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's J.J. McCarthy or bust, really. I mean, this team, Hawaii, I'm referring to, is just not. It's not a good team, so you really can't take away a whole heck of a lot. I mean, you can take away small points like being pleasantly surprised with the defense, like they were, like how good they were against Colorado State. But, we're getting to the point now where it's just kind of like, well, we'll see what happens. I mean, if JJ has a really bad day, then yeah, you could probably be concerned. I think, if Michigan ends up playing badly, I think it's a fine line, right? Because if Michigan plays really well, they can say, oh, well, it's just Hawaii and we don't really know. But if Michigan plays really bad, then you can say, okay, well, maybe this team isn't as good as we think they are. So it's a really a fine line with these games where you can't really learn something, but you can learn something at the same time. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure, let's say JJ goes off and people will just always point to, okay, well, it's Hawaii. It's not, not a great team. So, let's see what JJ can do against, big time opponents. So I think at the end of the day, I think I would expect a pretty decent performance from JJ. And I think that's the main storyline coming into this one. I can't really think of any other ones outside of, the feel good story of Roman Wilson playing against his hometown team. But, yeah, I think all eyes are on JJ in this one. And, he has the opportunity right now to really lock this down and, really lock it down and really kind of cement himself as the guy moving forward. I mean, he's, you can imagine that he's going to give Harbaugh something to think about, when you look at the breadth of work of both guys. I mean, because Cade's going to play on Saturday. I mean, that's a given. But, I think, both, you're going to get a breadth of kind of what you're going to expect here. And, I don't know. I don't expect UConn to be a big quarterback talking point. I think, once Saturday's done, you'll really start to, you'll start to get a clearer view of how things are going to shape out.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. Michigan is going to parlay this really weak 1-2 punch to open the season with UConn in the third rendition of Michigan football in 2022, and they're not much better than the first two, to say the very least, right? So that's a really bad team in UConn. So this feels like the moment, right? And you and I, we talk with people internally. We'll talk about that as far as the quarterback competition goes here. To me, like from what I've heard, and I know we haven't really crossed much this week on what we've heard, but from what I've heard, it seems like an obvious thing internally. Like, hey, he goes out there and plays well. It's pretty much it, right? Like, what are we going to do at that point? If he goes out there and plays even close to his ceiling, right? Because we know that JJ's floor isn't that low, right? Like interceptions, sure. Turnovers, sure. Like we know he's prone to that because of his play, but his floor isn't that low in the first place, given his raw ability. And then you add on the fact that his ceiling is like superbly high. So
Right.
really on Saturday, all he has to do is find some middle ground between those two, and he's good. So he doesn't have to play spectacular.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to roll this into a Hawaii preview a little bit, I guess, they're the worst team in college football right now. I know that they've played twice already, but I mean, they got mopped by Vanderbilt and they got mopped by Western Kentucky, and both games were at home.
Yeah.
It's like really bad. It's like superbly bad. Like Hawaii might be the worst team in the country, and if it's not Hawaii, it might be UConn. And I know there's a couple other
Yeah.
teams down there that are hanging out in the rock bottom tier, but Hawaii is so bad, and JJ McCarthy could not be the better quarterback to step into this situation against a defense like theirs and just go off and just do whatever the hell he wants for 60 minutes. And I know he's not going to play the full game, but what he can do in 2 quarters is if like, again, you say, what can you do with 2 quarters for the rest of your life? And that's pretty much how JJ is going to have to play on Saturday. Is he's going to have to play 2 quarters for the rest of his life, because this is really his audition. It's his debut. It's his tryout. Right. And for him, it's like, yeah, and I know this kid's always been a super philosophical kid. Just in the way he talks, you can tell he reads and studies a lot of mental traits, and I think that's what's gotten him to his level, and he credits that quite a bit on top of his physical traits. But I think for him, philosophically, like, he understands that this is his window, and if you don't grab that window by the horns and take it with you, it's going to linger. And the longer it lingers, the harder this whole thing gets. If JJ doesn't go win this job on Saturday, is it still realistic to believe that he'll win it later this year? Absolutely. Is it still realistic to believe that if he doesn't win it this year, that he'll win it next year? Sure, if he doesn't transfer. But, at this point, internally, it's one of those rare times where the internal vibe is extremely similar to the external vibe, and that everyone's kind of like, all right, this is pretty much it. Like, all you got to do is play close to your potential. Like, you don't even have to play the best game of your life. You don't have to go out there and win the Super Bowl. You don't have to beat Ohio State in your first game. You don't have to beat a rival in your first game. You have to beat the worst team in college football adequately. And you more than likely will be Michigan's starting quarterback going forward from there. And that doesn't mean it's secure, right? They're going to do this whole thing all the time.
Yeah.
So long as these two are in the quarterback room, Jim Harbaugh will more than likely evaluate them each week, right?
Right.
But going forward, he would have to believe to be the starter after that, right? So that's how I see it. That's how I've heard it. I don't know what you're hearing, but everything I've been told is like, it's like written at this point. As long as he does what he needs to do, like this, that's how it's going to play out.
Yeah, written in pencil, right? I think, I think this thing is going to be it's always going to be a thing, right? I mean, you mentioned it. It's going to be existing as long as those two guys are on the same roster. It's going to be a thing. Maybe not as prevalent as it once was if JJ can take the starting job, but I would not be surprised to see a situation where both guys play still, no matter who the starter is. But, I think when you're talking about a more, crunch time minutes, I think you're looking at something that, it's always going to be a thing. But, I think at some point you have to kind of draw the line in the sand and say, okay, this is our guy. This other guy will still play, but we're going to be, giving first team snaps and practices to whoever. I think you're spot on, in terms of what you're hearing too, is that, we're pretty much hearing that, this is JJ's to lose at this point. And, that doesn't take insider knowledge to know that, just if you're looking at a, specific, just a sample size of work just from one game, I think, you can make that assumption on your own. So we'll see, we'll see. I mean, I'll always kind of expect that this is going to be in the back of everyone's mind, and I'm sure it'll be talked about down the line, especially if JJ struggles in a game. They're always going to say, "Oh, put Cade back in," or do they put Cade back in? You got to preserve JJ's confidence. He's still a young guy, but he has plenty of confidence for the both of us. So Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting situation, after Saturday, because you're right. He doesn't have to play incredible. He doesn't have to be, this Heisman candidate quarterback. He just has to play good enough, just good enough. And, for him, that's still pretty good. For Michigan standards, that's still pretty good. He can kind of acknowledge and, he can bring Michigan's offense to a new level just by being good enough. And, I think ultimately that's what Jim Harbaugh is looking for.
So why does he only have to be good enough? Well, Cade McNamara struggled quite a bit against Colorado State, 1 of 6 in the red zone, only 1 pass of his 18, of which he completed half of, was further than 10 yards in an attempt. He only had 2 passes result in 10-plus yards, and one of them was a 6-yard mesh to Eric All that he turned for 15 yards, albeit a good pass from McNamara, and arguably one of the better passes really of his career here, but really overshadowed by the rest of them that were bad for the most part. He missed a lot early on with the dunks underneath. I mean, easy throws like flicks. It's not, and that's where this conversation comes from. Is it's not like Cade McNamara went out against Colorado State and was, I guess, less than desirable. He was bad. He was not good. The tape shows it. It's not something that's worth sugarcoating. It's not something worth saying that anyone's creating an angle about. He completed half of his passes. None of them were efficient. Missed all of his overly efficient attempts. I mean, you're talking like 99th percentile of completion percentage in the zone he was throwing a couple of the passes that he missed. Is that who he is every day? No. We've seen Cade McNamara play a lot better, but we've also seen McNamara play that bad. Yeah. So in my vision, how I see it is we know how bad, and shout out to user Baby Crit for making this point on our message board. We know how good Cade McNamara can be, and we know how bad he can be. There's nothing more to find out about him. He is no different this year than he was last year based on what we saw against Colorado State. And if there's ever a time to show that you're different than you were last year, like you've been saying for the bulk of the offseason, then it's in the first game of the year, when not only is it the first game of the year, but it's also this whole first tryout for your quarterback competition. And then that brings up the point about designs, where it's like, did he not design anything for him? Because when JJ got in, sure looked like they did.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. We know what Cade is as a quarterback. We know his ceiling and we know his floor. The one thing we don't know is what's JJ's ceiling and what's JJ's floor. We don't know either of those things. There really wasn't a chance for him to show that. I mean, he showed flashes, but you can't establish a floor or a ceiling off flashes. I mean, you need some tangible evidence to really show what he can do. And he didn't really show tangible evidence against Colorado State. I don't think he got enough snaps to show that. So, and I don't think you'll be able to make that distinction off of a start against Hawaii either. So that kind of brings us right back to where we started, where, I think JJ offers a little more than what Cade does. And it's JJ's point. It's job to lose at this point, because we don't know his ceiling, which also can be a little scary too, because we don't know his floor. But, I don't think he could be that bad, all things considered. But we haven't really seen him do much in terms of, making the dangerous throws or really controlling a whole drive. You can point to the miscues against Michigan State, the fumbled snap in the rain, but, I don't think that, I don't think he really should have been out there, but I understand why he was out there. But I think, this is where we're going to learn a little bit, but not a whole lot. But that's why we have the whole season to kind of glean what this can be. And I think the only way we can really truly learn what JJ can do and how McCarthy can take Michigan to that next tier is by, letting him go. Letting him just see what he can do. And, I can understand why Michigan has kind of held him back a little bit, because, it's a big job to be a quarterback at Michigan, a true freshman at the time last year, to go out there and command an offense in Big Ten play. It's not easy. So we'll learn a little bit. And I think I'm expecting to learn a whole heck of a lot here in the next coming weeks.
Yeah, we will certainly be looking at this from a totally different lens in a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, we can't hit fast forward. We have to live through Hawaii and UConn and watch those games and analyze them from a from a perspective. Which last year, you think about the Washington game, that was one where everyone was kind of like, "Oh, this will be a blast to get a measuring stick," and then they lost to Montana, and then came to Michigan, and they looked a lot like Ohio State. The scoreboard was a little different because the offenses were a bit contrasting, but I mean, Michigan's offensive game plan looked awfully similar. We don't have that this year. These non-conference games are paint dryers, and it is what it is. But luckily, Jim Harbaugh decided to throw some oregano in there, spice it up a little bit, taste the wooden spoon, and add it to the quarterback competition to make it fun, make it spicy. So shout out to him. Gives us something to do during these weeks, because otherwise we'd be coming up with lists of the top 10 running backs to ever play at Michigan if it was week 2 against Colorado State and there wasn't week 2 against Hawaii and there wasn't a quarterback competition. But thanks to good old Jim, there is. So talk about Colorado State outside of Cade for a minute and outside of the quarterback competition as a whole. Michigan defensively, big questions coming into the year. Defensive line, replacing the production of Hutch Ojabo. 7 sacks, 11 tackles for loss. Not all of those came from the D-line. I think it was half of the sacks came from there and half of the tackles for loss exactly split between the DBs and the D-line, which is showing that those DBs are able to fly through on the blitz because of how occupied those D-linemen are, especially Maize Smith, who at one time drew a triple teamer last week, I think, something like that. So they're doing their jobs. 2 defensive touchdowns. Like, hello, how are you, Jesse Minter? Welcome to the team. Great performance, great debut from his defense. Mike Elston takes to the podium on Wednesday, and says that he wants more production out of his pass rush, and says that he thinks they can be better, they can be more disruptive, and on and on and on. After a defensive performance that was, by all accounts, pretty pristine, right? So you see some high standards there for Mike Elston, who's a new defensive line coach, Jesse Minter, new defensive coordinator. So no complacency out of these guys. All right. And what are you expecting to see this week? Hawaii's offensive line is one of their better-ish units. They're frisky at the very least. That's how Mike Elston described them. He just said that they're going to be a tough line because of the friskiness. So I think that we will, at the very least, probably get a better test than 4 new transfer starters that Colorado State walked in with last week. So we'll have more to analyze from a defensive line perspective, because Hawaii's, while it's not good, at the very least, they know each other and they're not just having lunch and playing at the big house the next day. So, and they've had 2 games to play together before this game, even though they got drubbed. All right. But from a defensive standpoint, what do you think of Elston's comments, the lack of complacency there, and like what more could you possibly want than 7 sacks and 11 tackles for loss?
Well, you could ask for 8 sacks, right? Or 12 tackles for loss. I mean, that's just what coaches do. That you could have the perfect game in the fans' eyes, and Michigan coaches will always, well, no, I wouldn't say Michigan coaches, but all coaches in general, and even players too, will point to something that they did wrong or off, and there's always something they can improve on, right? That's just always the going line after big wins like that. So, I mean, Hawaii, even Timmy Chang himself this week said that the offensive line is one of his best position groups on the team. And, we got to consider the group and the team in general, but it should be a decent enough test for the group. I mean, I can point to a couple of examples of where Michigan could improve, closing in on sacks. They could have had a couple more with a couple of missed sacks, like Braden McGregor in one particular blew right by the quarterback. But again, that's at that point, it's basically nitpicking at this point, which I guess isn't exactly a bad thing considering what we've been talking about all offseason. So it's not really a bad thing, but I mean, that's good that they're hungry, right? I mean, it's not, they're not saying, oh, this is great, everything's great, we don't need to get better. We're at the pinnacle right now of our game. I mean, it's good that they're trying to get better, and they're right. I mean, there are places where they can get better. I mean, and it's not, wholesale changes that they have to make. I think they'll start maybe whittling down the rushing attack a little bit in terms of who gets more snaps, because really, if you look at the snap breakdown, it was pretty widely spread out between a bunch of guys. And I still think they'll continue that. But I think even Jesse Minter said it himself. They'd love to have a 12, 13, 14 sack guy, as compared to a whole, group of guys. They would like a guy, but I think they're perfectly fine with what they're doing right now. And, I think if you're an interior guy, I think you'd want to see more pressure from the interior. I mean, of course, as you mentioned, Mozzie Smith getting triple teamed isn't going to do him much in terms of showing up on the stat sheet. And that kind of attention doesn't show up on the stat sheet. That only, for people who really look at the film and notice what type of attention a guy is getting, which allows other guys to step up and make plays. So at the end of the day, that's it's a good thing. Mozzie Smith's presence is causing people problems, which is good. And I expect a lot of the same things to happen on Saturday. Maybe not 7 sacks. I mean, maybe could be more. Who knows? I mean, we don't really know what this Hawaii offensive line is like. I mean, I don't think they're as bad as Colorado State in terms of the patchwork transfers and not having chemistry, but just from the level of play from both teams, I expect Michigan to be really successful getting pressures in, and who knows, maybe we'll see a little bit equal performance, if not greater.
Michigan is not going to have their work cut out for them in this game as much as they will in a game like in a couple of weeks when they have to play against Talia Tagovailoa and the NFL offense that is Maryland. Raheem Jarrett, can't remember, Demas Jr., right? Yeah, Demas Jr. All right, I got that right. Okay. Whew. This whole college football landscape's different when you don't know every recruit like you used to. Right. So Deontay Demas Jr., Raheem Jarrett, Talia. I mean, that's an NFL offense right there, and Michigan will have to face that in a couple of weeks, but not quite yet. Hawaii's offense, not a world beater. 10 points against Vanderbilt, 17 against Western Kentucky. I mean, they lost to Vandy 63-10. They lost to WKU 49-17. Both teams covered. It's real bad. It's hard, and it's hard to break down because it's real bad.
It really
and
is.
And you know what? It's like, okay, well, let's look at past tape. Well, they got a new coach, and they have like all these transfers, and it's Michigan's first 3 teams they faced in the non-conference. Not only are these teams bad, they all 3 have a new head coach, and they all 3 have like an absurd amount of transfers. And I think it progresses. I think there's more transfers each week from each school. I think Colorado State had more than Hawaii, but regardless, from an offensive standpoint, looking at this, like we just talked about the defense and how Michigan performed against Colorado State and how that'll match up against Hawaii. I mean, their offense isn't scoring, but let's flip the script and you take a look at what Michigan can do offensively, not only when J.J. McCarthy's in, but when Cade comes in, when Bowman's in, when Orgy's in, hell, if Denegal gets in, if Warren gets in, they should do whatever they want. They should be able to do anything that they want. The second level for Hawaii is bad. I mean, their D-line isn't so bad. They have a defensive tackle whose name I can't pronounce, and he's pretty good. I think he's like their best player overall by far. Can't remember his name, though. But the secondary, like once they get into that second level, the linebackers and everything behind the linebacker, it's all bad. None of it's good. There's not good tackling. There's just no... It's not a team, man. Like this team's brand new. Like it's what it looks like, or that's what it has looked like. And that was 2 games at home. So now you got to fly from Hawaii to Michigan, play in the big house in your 3rd week. This might be the biggest blowout in like the history of Michigan football. So I'm trying to allude to, like, I'm trying to get to like Rutgers 2016 territory right here. Yeah. Like I'm not talking. Okay, modern day football. We'll put it that way. Modern football, modern, because I don't want to talk about 1817, but. As far as modern football goes, we're sitting here breaking down this game, Josh, and like it's going to be bad. Like the spread is over 50. The total is like 10 points above the spread. So that means they think Michigan's essentially going to win this game 63-7 or 63-6, something around there. It just keeps going up. So Vegas thinks Michigan's going to not only cover the 50-point spread, but also allow a touchdown. And in turn, this total is going to be over 60, right? Or nearly 70. Yeah. We're getting closer to the 70 mark. So this game has every indication of being a potent high-scoring assault from Michigan's offense. The
Yeah.
narrative of JJ getting that opportunity obviously has to do with the competition, but take the narrative out of it. Let's just remove that and let's just look at it from, okay, Michigan's starting quarterback on Saturday is JJ McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
How will his play match up against this terrible Hawaii defense without the narratives, just from a simple breakdown perspective?
Yeah, I think you nailed it though. I mean, I feel really bad. Like, I feel like we're being lazy in terms of our analysis, but it's like these guys are really this bad. There's really nothing to analyze.
There's
I
no
mean,
research. There's no
there's nothing to
research.
research because they're at the bottom of pretty much every key category statistically. So there's really nothing to break down. I mean, it feels like a lazy analysis, but it's just that's what we're in right now. This is the situation. So, yeah, I do also think that Timmy Chang's in over his head a little bit too. But that whole coaching search was a mess in his regard. But I kind of feel bad for him in that. But it is what it is. But yeah, I mean. Oh man, it's just they're just what can you say? I mean, you just hope that JJ plays a clean game, a mistake-free game. Maybe shows that Michigan is capable of throwing the ball downfield and kind of creating some explosive plays downfield. I think that's kind of what you expect because they didn't really throw the deep ball against Colorado State. I think that was probably the big fan takeaway from the offense was, hey, maybe you've got some deep threats. You've got some guys that can play. Why don't you give the ball to them? And I can, I don't disagree there. I think this is an opportunity to air it out a little bit. Whether they do, kind of depends on how vanilla they can make the offense. Do they try to establish the run and just kind of run the game out because they don't really have to do anything else? Or, can they get a little creative? I don't know if they want to show a whole lot on film. I mean, that's just what they are, heading into these first, I mean, heck, you can make the argument the first 4-5 weeks into the season, you can kind of be a little bit creative while kind of easing in. But yeah, I mean, as far as like, breaking down JJ's play, I think the biggest thing is if he can play mistake-free football, I think that'd be a good day for him. No interceptions, no fumbles, no, I don't know what else you could say. No sacks, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what else you can put out there in terms of a clean game. And Michigan played pretty clean last week. So, I mean, if they can continue that again, the no false starts, the no holdings, all that kind of stuff to for negative plays too. Yeah, I think, I mean, as long as he plays mistake-free football, I think you can consider that a good day.
Yeah. So if people are at home wondering, like, hey, at least tell us something about the scheme. Hawaii runs a run and shoot offense and a multiple defensive front. And as far as how the multiple defensive front should fare against McCarthy, the only thing that's going to do is if they scheme against JJ, should open up the lanes for Corum and Edwards to have a day. And then on top of that, if they decide to scheme against JJ, it's going to become more blitz counter stuff where Michigan's probably running a lot of RPO reads that end in passes or maybe even pass options rather than, maybe it's like a run pass type of deal rather than a run pass, which to explain that would be like a run pass would be JJ's either going to run, running backs are going to run, or JJ's going to pass. But a run pass would be two passing options, and the only run option would be to go to one of the backs. So to those at home who wanted to know what that meant. So, I mean, again, like we're trying to draw up a ghost versus a ghost because we have all we have is like the film that we've seen on JJ when he mixes into drives. I have no idea how Michigan's going to scheme him as a starter. And if anyone came here for game plan info, like, sorry. I don't know what to tell you. If I had to take a gander, right, you're expecting a lot of RPO stuff from JJ, like always, and all these RPO things should lead into pass options, and that's the point I'm trying to make. I don't really think that changes against any front. The only difference is with Hawaii's multiple front, they might scheme to maybe not stack the box, but they may stack the box early because Michigan will likely try to establish the run early. But again, like from a talent perspective, there's no way this is going to work out for Hawaii. But to give you guys our best effort at diving into how it might, that would be it. Because the multiple front should challenge the RPO and should challenge the option run, and it should, theoretically, but JJ makes one guy miss, and he's in the second level, and that's the whole story, right? And making guys miss is a lot easier when you're facing Hawaii than when you're facing Ohio State or whoever it may be. Offensively, it's a run and shoot for Hawaii, so it's not quite the air raid, but it is kind of similar. They'll do a lot of adjustments at the line, and they're going to counter what they see, and they're going to be on the fly, and they're probably going to push tempo, and Michigan seems to want that challenge. If anything, Michigan is getting that out of this, right? I mean, I know playing Hawaii kind of stinks, but at least you're facing tempo again for the second straight week, which is something you struggled with last year, and you're trying to get better at as a defense this year. So if there's anything to learn from this as a team, I would say that's it.
Right.
All right. So we're over 30 minutes. Let's get to predictions and get out of here. Get the people home, so they have to stop listening to us talk about justifying our Hawaii analysis. But we'll pick some key players, some breakout players from this week. Quickly, if there are key players from last week, I mean, Mike Morris had a great game. I know that the box score doesn't say Mozzie Smith had a great game, but he did have a phenomenal game, and the attention that he drew and allowed others to, play well. Rod Moore played great. I think R.J. Moten, I think, played well. Junior Colson played well. I mean, you talk about everybody who got a sack or a tackle for loss. Taylor Harrell was the highest graded defensive player, so I think he was worth the mention. Offensively, Roman Wilson had the 61-yarder. Donovan Edwards was extremely effective and was the highest graded run blocker, on top of being I think the highest graded runner as well. But ironically enough, Donovan Edwards was the lowest graded receiving back. And then Corum as well. So each running back got a touchdown. Offensive line was dealing with injuries, and we'll talk about that while we're here too. Ryan Hayes expected to play, according to Harbaugh. That's huge for Michigan. Not having him last week obviously did some damage. I would say the number one disappointment out of last week's offense would have been Trente Jones. He just didn't look good. A lot of pressures were allowed there from him. But that's really a recap from last week. And if there's key players to pick out offensively, you got to go with Roman Wilson. And then we just talked about the defense. So we'll roll that and we'll segue that into this week's key players. We'll pick out some guys who we think are going to break out this week from this game. We'll just leave J.J. McCarthy as like each of our 1As, and then everybody else that we're picking right now is a second tier. I mean, there's no way you can pick a breakout player and not be J.J., so we will just leave him in the ineligible section, and we'll just automatically elect him, I think, in unison. But yeah, I think that this is a game where, like, how can you not expect Roman Wilson to get a lot of designs going his way and not want the ball against Hawaii as his home state? You don't get that very often. It's not like being from Ohio. It's not like being from, Big Ten country in general. This is rare for him, so it's probably personal. So offensively, I'll go with Roman Wilson outside of JJ. And then defensively, I will go with DJ Turner. I just think Hawaii's going to be behind early and often, and they're going to try and air it out. And they probably aren't really scheming against individuals here. Like, that's just not like Ohio State comes to play Michigan. Scheming against throwing to a shutdown guy is a realistic thing. But if you're Hawaii, like, you have nothing to lose. You're just playing your game to the best of your ability. You're not scheming against throwing. You're not throwing away from number 5. Like, you're throwing to everybody and everywhere that you can. So I think DJ Turner continues his, I guess, havoc that he's been causing on offenses since last season, since that second half of last year when he really took that surge. And so I will go with Roman on offense and DJ on defense. Josh, hand it over to you for yours.
Yeah, I've been doing some thinking while you've been talking, and really I think two guys that come to mind immediately is Junior Colson. I think he'll have another solid game. I mean, he led both teams with 10 tackles last week, and I think that'll continue. I mean, they're going to pass the ball, and he's going to be all over the place. He's going to do what Junior Colson does. And I think offensively, I'm going to pick Andrell Anthony. I think him and JJ have a really strong rapport. Always has been since they're been in the recruiting class. So I think I think JJ really likes to throw to him, and I think he might be one of his favorite receivers here coming up in the near future. So I think this will give him a good opportunity to kind of break out and get some touches that he didn't necessarily see last week.
All right, we'll round it off with predictions. My prediction is 63-7. I think Michigan wins. I think the over hits, and I don't know, does Michigan cover at that mark? I think so. Yeah, I think they do. Yep. So it's at 51.5. So yeah, they would be covering at that mark. So with that being said, I've got Michigan winning 63-7. Again, guys, Michigan's offense with J.J. McCarthy in it is different. It's more potent. It's trying to be more potent. It's trying to score more points. It's trying to be more explosive than the methodical, machine we kind of saw last year when Cade was in, and then what we saw with Cade against Colorado State as well, where they handed the ball off 7 times in a row on one drive, albeit scoring a touchdown, right? So you can't blame them. But I think we're just going to see a more potent offense that's trying to score points. And I think that J.J. McCarthy understands how big of a stage this is for him and how important it is that he performs. And I don't think that we're wrong in saying that he doesn't need to have his best game to win this job. But it just feels like that's what's about to happen. It just feels like he's about to go have that game. So I will side with JJ having the game that he's anticipated to have, and I'll have Michigan winning it 63-7. Hand it over to you for your pick.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are pretty close. I have 66-10, and I just think, Michigan is just going to pour it on and maybe not even necessarily try to pour it on. They just do it. They can just conduct their offense and they score. I don't think they're trying to purposely embarrass anyone or anything like that. Right. I think they just run their offense and it works. And, maybe they get a couple of, interceptions or defensive touchdowns or even special teams touchdowns. But, yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty close last time they played. I think it was like 63-7 or something like that. The last time Michigan. Yeah, 63-3. So, I mean, I don't expect that much of a difference. I mean, it could possibly be worse, but, it's not easy to score 70-plus points in college football these days. So, yeah, I think 66-10. I think, Hawaii scores a couple of garbage points towards the end. But, yeah, I mean, this one should be a snoozer by halftime for sure.
I'm telling you, we're going to come back on Monday for the roundtable, and we're going to be talking about like a 78-0 type of score, like very Rutgers 2016 vibes. I don't have the cojones to make that call and make that prediction, but it really feels like what this game is going to be based on what we see on paper, and just based on what we've seen from Hawaii in those first 2 games and so many things. We have the smallest amount of sample sizes, but all the samples are extremely maize and blue, and none of them are green or black, because Hawaii is rough. So, all right, well, next time we talk to you guys, we'll be previewing UConn, and thankfully that will be the last non-conference preview we'll have to go through for you guys, where we're dipping through a ton of new information, new coaches, new transfers, people we don't know. Once we get into Big Ten play and we hit Maryland, and then Maryland parlays into Iowa, and we go from there. Josh and I are lucky to have been doing this for a while. Josh longer than I have. And through that, we've met a lot of people along the way within media. So we do plan on having guests on the show from the other teams at some point to come on and kind of break down who Michigan is about to face. But finding a Hawaii beat writer was difficult, to say the least, I would say.
Yeah, right.
But with that in mind, excited for next week's episode. Continue to tune in. If you guys are listening on the podcast app, whether it be Apple or Spotify, go ahead and leave us a 5-star review. That stuff matters, and we would appreciate it. And on top of that, follow us on social media. You can find us everywhere, Maize and Blue Review. Unless you're on Twitter, then it's at Michigan Rivals. Acuna makes his appearance. He could not go the whole episode without doing so, although he made it very far, so I'm very proud of him and very happy father right now. But anyway, Maize and Blue Review, Michigan.rivals.com. Make sure you guys sign up. Perfect time to do it. We haven't even hit Big Ten play yet, so you're still on time. And go join, $9.99 a month. Exclusive community. The den is buzzing like never before right now. We have so much fun on our board, dude. Like fantasy football leagues, Q&As, you name it. On top of all the intel and then the usual stuff you get, there are some things that we do here that I think are differentiating. I mean, we gave away tickets last week, and we plan on doing it again soon. So come join us. We'll talk to you guys next week. For Josh, I'm Brandon. Have a great weekend and enjoy your football Saturday and your football Sunday, because the NFL starts this week.
Yes, sir.
All right.